Well, Nega Mortazavi is an American-Iranian journalist and political analyst based in Washington, D.C. and joins me now. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Of course, Iran is no stranger to sanctions, is it? They've been living under US sanctions for the best part of a decade. What do these new UN sanctions look like, and what impact do you think they'll have on Iran's economy?
Absolutely. As you said, Iran is one of the most, if not the most, sanctioned country in the world. And they have been suffering for many years under these tough economic sanctions by the U.S. But they've also somewhat figured out their way into some form of stability, suffering, but also with stability. So these sanctions, these UN sanctions on arms, on certain individuals and institutions are not going to have the same kind of impact. In fact, essentially from the Iranian viewpoint, there isn't much left to sanction since every major industry is sanctioned in Iran. So these sanctions are not going to have an economic shock per se, a major economic shock. But the importance of these sanctions is more from a diplomatic and global perspective. This is essentially, these are seen as UN sanctions, not US sanctions, and it affects Iran's diplomatic and global standing. And it just makes it difficult for other countries to do that kind of trade, which they used to do, circumventing only US sanctions. In this case, it's going to be more UN sanctions. And so that's why the more pro-diplomacy camp in the Iranian political structure had been trying to avoid this snapback from going through, of course, not successfully.
Nega, certainly very interesting that you describe it there as suffering with stability, that they will be able to cope with this, that they have got allies in the region and they will be able to come out of the other side. But with sanctions on all sides, we've had the UN sanctions initially, then we had the US ones, and now the UN ones again. Iran's economy, it is severely hampered, although, as you say, it will still be able to function. Do you think that with these sanctions it now gets rid of the path to any diplomatic solutions, or do you think those diplomatic pathways remain open? Is there a way, in other words, to ease back that tension on both sides and get them both around the table again?
Just very quickly to add, I'm not minimizing the economic impact of sanctions until now and moving forward. The distinction I'm making is getting an economic shock, because every time you get a big round of sanctions, there's also economic shock and it's downward. Of course, Iran has been wanting sanctions relief and sort of an escape from the current economic situation, which hasn't been successful. But anyways, yes, that's stability with suffering, so a stable suffering of the economy. As far as diplomacy, no, I think the snapback move by Europe has narrowed the path to diplomacy very much, if not completely closed it. I think the Europeans used to have sort of this constructive role of the pro-diplomacy party. They provided the space, they provided the medium, a lot of mediation between Tehran and Washington, which always had a hard time negotiating. And now they've sort of lost that position, and they're seen completely in the antagonistic camp with the U.S. from Tehran's view, and they've taken a path toward escalation. So this will minimize, maybe not completely close, but it will really narrow the space for diplomacy moving forward.
I just want to pick up on something you said there about the point of these sanctions is to create an economic shock. I mean, that's the short-term point of these, but of course the longer-term point of these sanctions is to try and curtail Iran's nuclear ambitions and the nuclear capability. How much do you think these new sanctions, the UN ones, will go towards achieving that ambition?
I don't think they will, as sanctions in the past have not been able to, and many research time and again has shown this, not only in the case of Iran, but in the case of any other state that's been sanctioned. They do make the economy suffer. Sanctions do succeed in making average Iranians poorer and in a much worse economic situation, but they haven't succeeded in bringing change to state policy. They haven't in the case of Iran. They haven't in the case of many other sanctioned countries. And it's more of a feel-good, I think, diplomatic move, as we've seen both for the U.S., essentially for the West. It's their path to more escalation without actual conventional war. But unfortunately, it hasn't really brought policy change, and I don't think it's going to bring policy change, as the 12-day war, the actual military attacks, didn't really bring policy change to Iran, at least not until now.
Negin Mortazavi, thank you very much indeed from that, live from Washington, D.C.